What is up, everyone? It's Fox Winter. So, a while ago, somebody asked me to react to Enlisted Krieg from Sabaton. It's the Swedish version of a song from the Corals Rex album. And at first I thought I wasn't going to do it because the Corals Rex album was the first album of Sabaton I ever listened to. And I was like, yeah, I know these songs by heart, why would I do that? But then I remembered a specific incident when I just found out that there's two versions of the album. I've been listening to the Swedish versions and was like, yeah, okay, I don't need the English version because they're just gonna be translation.
Surprise, bitch.
They're not a translation. The text of the Swedish and the English version of the song are completely different, in fact. And I think it's very interesting, so I went through the texts, made some notes, and now I'm gonna discuss this with you. So this is not gonna be a reaction video, but more of an analysis. So both songs deal with the same topic, namely the tragic side of these wars, the 30 Years' War, and the life of the soldiers, the effects these wars had on society, on the soldiers themselves. So it's a very sad song, but they go about it in a different way. So starting off with the Swedish version of the song follows one Swedish soldier in the Karelians army. The song starts off with him saying he's leaving his hometown along with his friends because duty called him to war, and he doesn't know if he's ever going to see his family again. Then in the next verse, all the glory and songs that get carried onwards to the future don't exist when you're in the battlefield. And he sees his friends fall, and then in the end he himself falls and opens up the question, is there really a worthy end for a soldier? And who's gonna miss me? And that's a very central topic of the song because it's in the chorus, because the chorus has the line, who's gonna mourn me, who's gonna miss me? And that's a very interesting idea because it's true that if you're a normal soldier, if you're not Wallenstein or King Gustav Adolf or Axel Oxenstierna, your name gets forgotten, even though you fought just as hard as any man would in that army. And the song also builds up a kind of circle, because you have the soldiers going out in the battlefield, but even if he died and his friends fell, the war goes on. It actually says that in the song. The exact line is roughly translated, when my time has run out, who's gonna care? They keep fighting. And that closes the circle to new young soldiers coming into the battlefield. And the war goes on and on and on. The Swedish version has a very emotional approach because you follow this one person and you can really imagine what it's like, because the way the song opens up, you have this group of young men. It says that he's just a youth, not even a man yet, getting called into duty for a war that's implied to not really apply to him, because they're from a small village somewhere in Sweden. The politics and the expansion attempts of the Swedish Empire don't really have a positive influence on the life of such a person. I mean, historically, wars have only ever led to famine and death, basically, and also huge structural societal changes because so many men got killed off. And in the chorus, it ends on, remember me as this, a husband, a friend, a father or a son that will never come home again. And that's a perspective that gets forgotten a lot in songs about historic events and battles. If you look at history, it's just numbers and not single people. And you forget how much these people suffered, that they were called into the battlefield because they had to, and nobody really cared about them afterwards. The chorus starts off with, because war can destroy a man. It kind of implies that even if you can get away from that battle alive, those memories are gonna haunt you for the rest of your life. It kind of reminded me that Sabaton made a song about an American commander in To Hell and Back, who later on struggled with PTSD a lot, and that kind of reminded me of that, so maybe that's kind of implied. So now we're getting to the English version of the song. The English version does not follow a strict storyline like the Swedish version does. So from the beginning of the soldier's duty to his end and closing the circle to a new generation of soldiers. The English version focuses more on a snapshot of the situation, saying, okay, things are like this. In one line they say they've been fighting for 10 years and there's 20 more to come. So we're like 1/3 through the 30 Years' War, and this is how it is right now. The English version also says a lot of things explicitly that are only kind of implied in the Swedish version if you know about the topic, especially the historic backgrounds. The song starts off with the line, 2 ways to view the world. So similar at times, 2 ways to rule the world. The 30 Years' War was primarily a religious war between especially the Austrian Habsburgers and the Protestant North, mainly the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden, the Protestant Union basically. And of course, like every war, motivated by greed and hunger for more territory. There's 2 big topics in this English version of the song. Namely, for one thing, that there's a repetition aspect in these wars, not just the 30 Years' War, which also sparked a bunch of other wars actually, but that history repeats on and on. Not only do more generations of soldiers get called in when they get old enough, like our soldier in the Swedish version, that also the reasons are mostly the same. In the beginning you have the line, the propaganda speaks, those words been heard before, which is of course a pretty dead giveaway what this song is about. It's just the reasons for historic wars were always the same. Like in this case it was the Protestant Union versus the Catholics, but in the end it's just a power game. And the second big topic is that it doesn't really matter what side you're fighting on. I've quoted that before. The first verse says 2 ways to view the world, so similar at times, which makes sense because today Catholicism and the Protestant church, they're pretty much similar, even though the Catholics are a bit more hardcore. Distinction and the separation between people of Protestant and Catholic religion are by far not as extreme as they were back then. And the first verse goes on, 2 ways to rule the world to justify their crimes. And then in a later verse we have the line, the fog of war lies thick when armies scorch the land. And both of this kind of implies that it doesn't really matter if you're Catholic or Protestant, or honestly God knows what. No matter what side you're fighting on, the effects of this war on the general population, on the lands you're marching through is the same. The armies acted exactly the same. They all plundered, raped, and burned everything. They were Protestant or Catholic, didn't really matter. And the song ends on that note as well with the last verse. In death they're all the same, no right or wrong, no rich or poor, no matter who they served before. Because in death you're just a body, and no matter what you fought for, it doesn't matter anymore. You can't do anything about it, and the effects of what you've done are irreversible, and they don't get changed by the reasons you did it for. So while the way they went at the topic in the text is kind of different, the message is pretty much the same, even though it's more explicit in the English version than in the Swedish. There's a really ongoing theme in both versions. Both songs address that those men fighting there were basically kids. I've said in the Swedish version there's the line "Blott ungdom, knappt en man", so just a youngster, barely even a man. And in the English version there's the line "By kings and queens young men are sent to die in a war", which gets us one step further, namely the fact that those people fighting there didn't really have stake in it. They went because they had to, and the decisions were made by the rulers, who had financial and territorial interest in this war. But for a farmer somewhere from the north of Sweden, that there was really no point in fighting because he didn't have a benefit of it. This in the Swedish version that's only implied because you can kind of get that idea. He's a young man that comes from the edge of nowhere basically and is suddenly called into war for a reason he doesn't really understand. And the circle closes again with the realization that it will go on. In the English version there's this really catchy line, "It spreads like disease," which is historically pretty accurate because if you just look at World War One, it was a conflict between the Bosnians and the Hungarians, and suddenly the entire world was involved. But anyway, both songs end on this note of it's just gonna keep going, not just because it's the 30 Years' War, which of course, 30 years, that's a fucking lifetime, as the title says. So both songs kind of close the circle of it's just gonna keep going on and on with the same bullshit. And I'm really glad Sabaton made that song, because for one thing, this perspective is very easily forgotten when you talk about big battles, because all we see are numbers and not really the people, because their lives, realities are so far away from our own because it was so long ago. I mean, this was 1618. We can hardly even imagine what people lived like back then, let alone what it's like to be in a battlefield at that time, or to be in a battlefield at all. It's very interesting that this song kind of sticks out from the Chorales Rex album in general, even though there's another ballad about when Gustav Adolf died and he died pretty far out of his own territory and had to be hauled back basically. And that song is about how Sweden is mourning their king and being unsure how this war will go on. And a lot of the songs on the Chorales Rex album are, dare I say, glorifying, because they're definitely talking very positively about this entire thing. Especially like Leonid Frenoden or Chorales Rex, the song itself. They pose this king as this mighty warrior that only did the best for his country and whatever, which I'm not qualified to really judge, but going into war is in general a very bad idea. If we're being honest, none of these wars were necessary. I find it kind of ironic that in the English version there's the line, "What can be done?" Yeah, like, stop maybe? Which is of course a blatant simplification of the actual matters, but seriously, come on. A lot of the 30 Years' War was actually fought on what is now German territory, and it's kind of strongly implied that it's really not necessary, especially by this aspect of repetition, and the fact that this war went on for 30 years is insane. 30 years is, as the title says, a lifetime. People in the 17th century oftentimes didn't even get to that age, even if there was no war involved. So to conclude this, because I lost my train of thought like 3 times by now, I like the song. It's really cool, not just because it's thematically different than usual, puts light on an aspect of history that gets kind of forgotten, and also because that song is just a banger. I don't know. It's so sad. Like, I get really emotional listening to that and getting into it, but it really gets my heart, and that makes it really cool. So yeah, if you like this, if you want to see more of these kind of analysis type things, leave me a comment. And if you like this, leave me a metal hand down at the like button. I will see you in the next video. Bye, and keep rocking.